Today, I'm really excited to have Charles Gellman on the podcast. Charles is the CEO of Hido Health, a startup that is using AI powered robotics to help change the lives of millions of patients. Before starting Hido Health, Charles had worked at Microsoft, Premier Inn, and Johnson and Johnson. He is also a former advisor to StartX Med and has worked as an executive at both startups and Fortune 500 companies. It was really cool to have Charles on the podcast because having direct robotics inside homes to help humans has become more and more of a talking point in Silicon Valley and something I believe will become huge in the next 10 to 15 years. And so to talk to someone who's at the very forefront of that and is using AI robotics to monumentally shift the lives of a huge demographic of people was really interesting and was a great conversation. So, with that said, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Hey, Charles, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you on and talk about Hido Health and the work you guys are doing. But before we get into that, I'd love to talk about what got you into the world of entrepreneurship.
That's a great question. There was really no intent plan. A lot of times people have, some type of path that they're going down for a particular reason. I actually had a medical scare where I almost lost my life. So I was in the hospital and I was misdiagnosed with, it was a kidney stone, or supposed to be a kidney stone, but it was ruptured appendicitis. So my entire course veered from banking to medical very quickly based upon my interactions with the healthcare system. We can slowly unpack that conversation.
Right. Right. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, so you got into the medical, unfortunately, you got into the medical system there. So, what were the insights there that ultimately led you to entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so the entrepreneurship side, at my background is really from a sales background and commercializing new technologies. I've been living in the Bay Area for a while, and I was exposed to some of the startup community. I was a mentor at StartX Med, which is a Stanford-based accelerator and advisor
Mhm.
for a computational data drug discovery company, and that opened up my eyes to some of the different types of technologies and leaders and people thinking about the future. So I got a taste. And when you get
Right.
a taste, you tend to want a little bit more. So you kind of slowly go down that rabbit hole. And then once it has you, it sucks you into the vortex. So I got slowly
Right.
sucked in and then, just decided to jump in.
Right, right. Yeah, no, totally. I think that's something I felt throughout my life, right? Since I was a kid, for me personally. So, it's just about taking the leap. That was one of the big parts there. But always wanted that to do my own startup. So, I can totally understand that. And I think what's interesting there is like some people have this moment where it just clicks, and they're like, "Oh, this is this huge problem that I needed to solve," and I decided to make my own startup. Or some people gradually get there. So I know you had this unfortunate situation with the medical system and being in the hospital. So was there like a moment when you were there that just clicked that, hey, there's a big problem here that I need to work on? Or was it more of just a gradual thing which you realized that, hey, I think this is something I should look at?
Yeah, so I did not have a moment. I was completely naive to the entire healthcare system, and I
Right.
barely knew how to navigate it. I was in my early 20s. My eyes were open, but not open to exactly what was going on. So, after years of reflection and actually navigating the system from a professional standpoint, I worked with pharma, I worked with medical device, I worked with medical software. I did a master's in clinical informatics, which is just a fancy term for data science. And I was trying to figure out, maybe there's a better way to care for people if we could figure out the blueprint for health. And the blueprint for health is really three different things. One is diet and nutrition. Two is exercise and mobility. And three is medications if you don't follow the first two.
Right.
So if it's left to that third one, the medications, there's usually a cocktail of medications that somebody takes that elicits an outcome. And that changes your blood work, that changes your vitals, and that changes your probability of going to the hospital or the ER, which is what happened to me earlier on in my life that I'm trying to prevent.
Right.
So we looked out in the market and I was trying to figure out, well, maybe there's data sets that exist that are precursors or predictors to people taking their medications, and then I could kind of create that algorithm. And
Right.
I quickly realized that once you start investigating that, they don't exist. And I was a little surprised that there was nothing out there in the market like that.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. And I guess, let's just get into it now because I'd love to talk about that. I think, a lot has been made about AI and the big changes that'll bring for us. A lot of people, especially right now, are talking about generative AI, which, of course, has a lot of potential. But I think for me, some of the really exciting stuff in AI is like the work Hido Health is doing, right? And so like I first love to understand you know, first off, if you just give a little bit of summary what Hido Health does, that'd be great. And then I'd love to talk about how you guys are using AI to make yourself distinctly different compared to other health companies that might be out there. Or if there aren't any health companies that are doing this, then just where you guys saw the opportunity in the market.
Mm-hmm. So Hido stands for Health Information Data Outcomes, and Hido also means covered in Japanese.
Okay.
So what we do is we specialize in AI assisted robotics to help people care for themselves without the assistance of others. So I want you to really absorb that. So we're saying that basically people without any assistance that have chronic diseases and have repeated hospitalizations and ER visits are now capable of caring for themselves with a device.
Right.
And that is something that can monumentally shift the entire care system.
Right. Yeah. No, that's huge, right? I think a lot has been made about AI replacing human jobs, I guess, but I think in this case, it's a life critical thing, right? And to have a human there all the time, it's a pretty big burden for a lot of people to take on. So if you can replace that with a device that's always with you, and of course, you don't have that limitation in terms of what humans have, that's a big deal. That's a really big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal for a lot of people, not just because the labor force is not there. It's also cost prohibitive, and people want that independence and freedom in the home. So what we do, what Hido really does enable, is that you're able to walk up to the unit. It uses Face ID to unlock, so you validate that's the right person at the right time, the right place. It dispenses the right dosage and the right frequency, and then we actually do a recording of the medication that occurs in front of the device, and they walk away. And then on the back end, from a population standpoint, you can see all of those patients, and you can make sure the people that are caring for themselves are fine, and the ones that need assistance can now be intervened at when needed versus retrospectively when I show up at the hospital or the ER. That's too late. Get to them before that happens.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. And I guess something that would take especially for more critical situations, right? Something that might take five caretakers for five different people can now be handled by one caretaker, right? Because they can have that alert and know they have to intervene rather than having to always constantly be there, even for the smaller tasks, right?
Yeah, well, you just think about it. 99.9% of our time is spent in the home.
Right.
You go to the clinic or you go to the hospital, which is a sterile environment with nurses, doctors, pharmacists, med techs. You have a gigantic team of people looking to support you, and that's why it's a high cost center. But at home, everything is dependent upon you to care for yourself.
Yep.
And if there's no assistance at home besides you to take care of a complex regimen, we've already seen what the outcome of that is.
Right. Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I mean it can be small things, right? Like the moment you have this type of application, right? Whether it be in hardware perspective or in software, right? There's so many different ways you can take it. Small thing would be or not a small thing, but like, your more obvious answer is okay, you get your medication dispensed, like you mentioned. But you can do stuff like, okay, you can send a notification to your patient and say, hey, you haven't taken your medication for today. You can give that healthcare data to doctors so they know, okay, this is where they're taking the medications, typically the dosage they're taking. And there's a lot of stuff you can do with that data. The doctor can see insights in, or you can even provide that to medical providers. So I think the moment you get data in the system and you get people with the technology, there's so much more you can do there.
Yeah, and I think you touch on a good segment because it's not just data in the system because the EMRs have plenty of data, but it really is unique quality data insights.
Right.
So because they have this visibility of accountability and transparency for specific titration or dosages of medications, you can now validate how much medication is someone taking, what does their blood work look like, and what are those outcomes, and then you can titrate up or down based upon how people respond. So that's called precision medicine.
Right. Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I think so if I understand correctly, actually, let me talk about the robotics itself. So, you mentioned that you go, you get your dosage dispensed. So does it already have the the medications that the patient needs, and then just you fill it up and it dispenses it for you? Is it more like does it have like a general medication that every unit comes with? Like how does this work?
Yeah. So basically, the unit fits 7 medications,
Okay.
up to 90 days of meds, and those are unique to the patient to make sure that they stay out of the hospital, they stabilize their disease state, and they live a healthy life on their own. Now, the device is like a Keurig coffee machine and a hybrid of a ring device. So instead of putting a pod coffee machine or a coffee pod, what you do is you put the pill bottle in there normally, and we have a specialized cap that auto recognizes medication, dosage, frequency, and count. So the end user doesn't have to do anything. So you literally drop it in, close the door, it loads it. You walk up to the unit when needed, and then it dispenses a count according to how your medication is prescribed. So the overarching goal of Hido is to drastically reduce the amount of medication errors that happen at home.
Right.
And by doing that, you control a lot of the unnecessary hospitalizations and ER visits that are currently happening right now.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, especially when you talk about, medication that's, it can be really dangerous in higher amounts. You have to take an exact amount. That's a really big thing there. And, even, you can even go another story. There's a story of abuse as well, right? Some people abuse their medication. So that's also, a way to be prohibitive to that. So I can see so many different avenues of where this can help people. Uh, but it's such a simple solution to do that, which is, I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, that's what I think it makes it so eloquent is that in theory, it sounds so simple and easy to do. And your audience, I think, will appreciate this. Once you develop something from a hardware perspective, there's a lot of engineering that goes into making this possible.
Yeah.
So if you're customizing and designing your boards, you're going to manufacturing, you're putting it together, it's got to be user friendly. So you got to have a fantastic UI. And ultimately, the end user doesn't have a easy experience, they're not going to use it. So you have to design it with the end user giving feedback the entire way as you develop.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. And I think actually to pull it back a little bit, so we sort of touched where the your starting point was for this journey. You decide, okay, I want to make this not happen to other people, and that's where you started this company. So you had this idea, but I love to get into it, like, okay, how have you gone from idea to actually getting these in customers' homes? Like what has that journey been like?
Yeah, so it's been very interesting. I literally started. I think it's just the telltale. Pen and paper. My handwriting is terrible. If I held something up, it would probably look like hieroglyphics. So I am not an artist. I am not an engineer. I literally had my daughter sketch out the first Hido unit and then transition that to my lead engineers that started that process and started to design it. But uh, from the very first prototype that we had, it was not a thing of beauty by any far. It was far from, it was functional and we learned a lot, but it was far from where we're at right now. So getting from that initial prototype phase and having it functional to the next version of testing it out and having friends and family that actually needed this device and giving us feedback, that was a monumental shift. And we have quite a few testimonials on YouTube about patients with stroke and with dementia and cardiovascular disease, all telling us about their experiences.
Right.
And it's just really interesting. Once you start talking to those patients, you start hearing about their individual stories and how much it's impacted them. And that's really driven a lot of the development and the pivots along the way that since we started.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think well, first touching on your first point there, I don't think the first prototype has ever looked that great anyway, I think you have other fields like music where a musician can really hit it off on their first album. But what people don't see is like those songs they made across the way that they've never released, right? And so I think a lot of people have this wrong perception that you can always hit off at the beginning, but it's very hard to do that. So typically what happens is you build up, and so that I totally That makes a lot of sense, and I think that second point you mentioned, like iterating and actually getting this in customers' house and getting that feedback. I think as a startup, that's obviously first amazing because it fuels you. It sees you can actually see customer impact, and that's amazing for your own personal journey. But second, that really helps you develop the product because I think going from an idea to something in customers' houses, there's actually such a big gap to that, and it's like it's a slow iterative process to get there. So really interesting hearing that.
Yeah, and also it also gave us chances to stress the device out. So I never intended this device to work with dementia patients,
Right.
but we learned through friends and family it does. And that led to NIH funded research with Rush University, where right now, as insane as this sounds, we have patients with dementia that are able to set up our device, dispense our device and their medications without any assistance. So think of the implications to people that have memory care issues are able to help themselves without a caregiver.
Right. No, that's truly crazy. That's no other way to say it. That's truly remarkable. And I think actually that sort of leads to my next question there that I was thinking about is that you know when we design products, right? If I'm like, for example, for my startup, it's students and companies, so it's very set out, right? I can talk to companies, I can talk to students, and get the information I need. And it's pretty easy to get that feedback as well. But I think what's really interesting about your group of people that you're working with is, yes, you can get the feedback by talking with patients, but you have cases like dementia, you have cases where people, it's a little bit tougher to get that feedback and to actually have a very honest conversation with the patient because they have their own challenges there. So like, how do you go about designing specifically for that group? Like, what has sort of been the challenges there, and how have you guys alleviated that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So earlier I alluded to stress testing the device, taking it to the brink and seeing if it'll break.
Hmm.
So we have, one patient, Anthony, he's in a wheelchair and he had a stroke. So he lost half his movement on the side of his body. And we wanted to see if he could roll up in his powered wheelchair, go up to the device, unlock it, and with one hand, take his medications and do so without being dependent on his wife that needs to work.
Right.
And if he's able to do it, and patients with dementia are capable of doing this on their own, maybe we are underestimating the power of the humans, of us, of what the society says is okay. And maybe with assisted technologies, there's more people can do.
Right. Right. That makes sense. And I think but you know what? I actually have a quick follow-up to that, just to ask you, like, there's so many different, like, taking medication is a universal problem, right? But there's so many different conditions that you have to look at, right? So at what
Mhm.
point do you draw the line? Because you could even go so far to help people who are, I don't know, blind, right? And put braille on the machine.
Yes.
So there's just so many different directions you could take the machine depending on the challenges that people are facing, if they are facing any. So like, how do you get a
Yes.
cutoff there that, okay, this is our product, these are the people
So,
who we're optimizing for?
yeah. So our primary focus right now is cardiovascular
I see.
disease. So, cardiovascular disease and diabetes, you got roughly, 15-20% of the US population, and it's a big problem throughout the world. But where you cut it off, right? So for our immediate users in the area, our goal is to impact as many lives as
Hmm.
possible. So we have folks with Parkinson's disease, the folks with dementia, terminal cancer, cases that I never intended the product to be used on, but people were so desperate for something versus just being hopeless. So any folks that we can give hope to and help them out, we will do
Right.
so. From a go-to-market strategy standpoint, we're focused on cardiovascular disease and Medicare Advantage health plans and home health, and that's where we're going to push. To make as big of an impact as possible, but our goal is to impact as many lives as possible.
Right, right. And I think one big part of that is getting the device into people's houses. So I think and we talked about this briefly before the call, but making a prototype an idea is one thing, and actually manufacturing it's a whole different game. And I think what people don't realize is prototypes are very impressive, don't get me wrong, but the most impressive is actually getting that mass manufactured and making sure that people can actually have that at home. So when you think about, or when you went through mass manufacturing this, or I assume maybe you're going through it right now too, What is your thought process there, and what have been some challenges?
Yeah, I think it's definitely quite a bit of learning curve. I'm very fortunate that my co-founder is a biomedical engineer and he's very advanced and having experience with contract manufacturers. But when you start looking at prototypes, you can't outsource it all. Otherwise, you're going to burn through all your cash. And it's important to really understand what fast prototyping is.
Right.
So what we've done a little bit different is using a fleet of 3D printers to do a lot of the skins, a lot of the parts. Every single part of our device has been 3D printed except for the chipsets. But you have to think about that. Everything was 3D printed, every single iteration.
Right.
And then for direct for manufacturing, for contract manufacturing, that's a little bit different because you have injection molding. There's different criteria and specifications, but you've got to be able to quickly pivot and iterate and advance and modify your device, and you got to be able to do it locally and not outsource that in order to make this a reality.
Yeah, I mean, getting parts. Even like when I talk to people in hardware, right? Getting parts is such a big issue as it is, because if you send it to your manufacturer, like, hey, we want these parts, then there's a shipping time, they're back, and there might be some issue with the parts you get. So like, definitely it makes sense, having the fleet of 3D printers there. I think that eliminates that whole process. So when you do go to your manufacturer, you can be like, hey, this is our final part. This is what we need manufactured. Can you do it? And I think actually, especially with a lot more advancements coming in 3D printing manufacturing, I'm sure you'll reach a certain point where you can just send the design, like validate locally, send the designs over, and you can get part even more quicker, right? Because it's already set up for 3D printing. So definitely really interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely been quite an experience. I would say the startup is the closest thing to a roller coaster ride, um, without actually jumping on one.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, when I think about Hido Health, so, you guys are starting with medical dispensing, but I think what's really interesting is that, there's so many different ways of developing specialized robotics in the house, especially. And we're already seeing that, there was a big push with IoT a couple of years ago with all the different, uh, robots coming out. But I think it sort of died down a little bit. But I think specifically for this, there's so many ways you could take it, right? Like, you're starting with just medication, but there's so many other ways robotics can integrate into the house. And
Hmm.
and there's so many different problem spaces to tackle here. So I know it's a little bit early on right now, because I'm sure you guys are just focusing on this product and getting people's houses. But when you think about the future of Hido Health, what do you think about the problem space these guys can tackle, and about essentially an ecosystem of specialized robotics that are helping patients out?
Yeah, I think about Hido. I think about how do we advance health equity and impact as many lives as possible to keep people sustainable and healthy so they can focus on their lives versus their health. So by really thinking about that from the final outcome to now, what do we have to develop in order to make that happen? So one, the Hido devices are behavior modification tools to alter good behaviors
Right.
and to change those patterns into something consistent. So those are part of the primary endpoints that are needed in order to stabilize or potentially regress specific disease states. So let me back up. Heart failure. There's a thing called heart remodeling. Heart remodeling occurs where it actually improves your function if you're taking your medications. So you can actually improve the function of a specific disease state if you take your medications. Then you have secondary inputs, which are, I'm checking my blood pressure. I'm checking my HRV, which is my heart rate variability, or I'm checking my scale. So imagine if the Hido device is paired up with, which is Bluetooth enabled, to some of those other types of products and your lab work. And then finally, you know how specific populations are reacting or responding based upon other folks that are similar in genetics or similar in disease state or age or et cetera, et cetera. So as I see Hido, I see a giant ecosystem
Hmm.
coming together as one that's actually coordinated, where right now it's terribly fragmented all over the map.
Yeah.
And I want to bring that world together so then we can advance medicine, and completely change the way people are treated.
No, for sure. And I mean, having that central integration, and those data points that researchers could use is massive, right? We have different studies right now, like and different different ways that researchers go about getting that information. But if there's a way they could tap into it, which without having to do all of that, that's huge for them, because that time, that time to doing that, research, and then going into actually like building solutions for that is massive. So reducing that is a big deal. So yeah.
Well, you touched on one thing. So think about clinical
Mhm.
trials. Think about research and drug discovery. What if you actually knew the data was 100% accurate versus being reliant on patients to either write it on a
Yeah.
diary, or they're called patient self-reported outcomes, where they're telling you whether or not they're taking it. So now you have real efficacy and safety results because you know dose by dose what's going on. Then if you could actually, if you have enough of these units out, you can start looking at people that have the disease state, so you can accelerate clinical trials because you already know where those people
Yeah.
stand. So you could send them those medications if they, opted in for those experimental trials, but you would actually have access, fast access to all of those patient recruitment.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, outliers are a huge problem in clinical trials, trying to identify them and then ultimately work around them. So being able to solve that and then have more access to more people who might be interested in those clinical trials and getting that information very quickly is huge. And I think this, alongside other amazing breakthroughs in research and development, can definitely go a very long way. So I definitely see your point there, and I'm really excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, we're very excited with the potential in the future. We've seen some amazing things happen that I could never imagine, since we started. It's just, every single day I'm surprised and shocked by, how people are using our device and the impact it's making on their
For
lives.
sure. And I think, as a general trend I'd love to talk to you about, I think accessibility to technology and caring for challenging groups, or for caring for challenged groups, I think that's something, for a long time that people didn't necessarily make technology for, because they thought it was too much of a niche market. But I think nowadays we're seeing a huge expansion of these different technologies coming out, and really catering towards people who, who have these challenges, right? And so a great example of that is, video games and general software nowadays, they have a lot of accessibility options. Or like I have a friend, for example, who's working on smart glasses for the blind. So there's a lot of different new companies that are coming out that are trying to address challenges for these groups. So, what do you think has been the catalyst to this new wave of companies, and why do you think we're seeing it now?
Yeah, so that's a very intriguing question. I was reading something that was or published by CalPERS. CalPERS is one of the largest self-funded insurance plans within the United States, and 1% of their chronic care patients spend 39% of all hospital or health spend.
Oh, wow.
So 1% almost equates for half of the total spend. So why is there so many people focused on these specific items? Because a very few impact a large distribution. And in the United States, it's a $4 trillion
Yeah,
market. So you impact very few. That's a monumental shift in impact in the marketplace. And the people that are usually challenged have multiple chronic conditions. They may not have access to transportation. Maybe they didn't pick up their medications. Maybe they just need a reminder. If they live alone or they have mental health conditions, they're 6 times more likely to go to the hospital. So these are the people that just need a little bit of
right.
assistance. And to your point, those glasses, that might make a world of difference if they can see in the refrigerator and see that there's
Right.
food there, you know? So I just think that there's a lot of opportunity to make an impact on many
Yeah,
lives.
for sure. And I think, maybe on a more, philosophical level, I feel like people have been more daring recently too, because I think for a long time that FCC, that the certification you need basically to make medical technology was a big barrier for a lot of people. But I think this new wave of entrepreneurs are like, it's okay, we're gonna deal with it. There's still a pathway here. But I think it's completely worth making a product for these people so they can get a better life. So yeah, it's really interesting to see. And actually, how's your experience been with that certification part of it?
So we're in a special class. So we're a class one 510K exempt
Okay.
device. So we're assisted technology, but there are different types of new technology certifications to fast track the process, especially depending upon the impact. So I wouldn't say, don't go after the idea if you think it's going to have a significant impact, because there are pathways to make that happen. So, typically with the FDA, there are more regimented variations of classes depending upon, if it's a life-saving device or if it's an assisted device or medication, perhaps, and they have to level, they judge the safety and efficacy versus the risks to a human. So, if you think that you can make a big impact, it's going to alter the course of many lives, then I would say just go after it. And then, while you're working with that, there's plenty of folks that know all about the regs and the certifications, and you just make sure that they're running right alongside
Right.
with you.
Clearly, I'm not that guy because I totally messed up the FDA and the FCC, which is a pretty, pretty monumental mistake. So, my bad, everyone. But of course, if you are working on something in that space, go find the proper lawyer, go find the right people who can get you that certification. But yeah, no, thank you so much, Charles, for coming onto the podcast. I really enjoyed talking about Hido Health and your experience here. Before I go, I actually have two last questions I want to ask you. The first one being is there a book that you recommend us reading? And I remember you told me that your dad's actually an author, right?
So my dad is an author, and his books are rather long, so I haven't had a chance to read them. He has written about 10 of those books, and each one of them, I swear, are about 300 to 500 pages long. He is a big history buff. So he's written a series on FDR. I think he's got 4 or 5 books, and now he's finishing a series on Richard Nixon. So what I would say to your audience, if you're interested in history and you want to take a look, my father is an author. It's Erwin Frederick Gelman. So go ahead and take a look at the books if you're a history buff.
Okay, well, yeah, I'll try linking those down in the in our Goodreads list that we have going on. I actually am a pretty big history buff, but just with everything in startup land, I don't think I'll have a time to fully sit down and start reading it. But hopefully, when I do, and things are a little bit more calm, I will get around to that because I'd love to read that and get more insight into those precedents. Um, but cool. The last question I have for you then is, what is next steps for you and Hido Health? What can we look forward to?
Yes. So we are speaking with several very, very large health plans right now. We've already had early results from a Medicare Advantage plan in Northern California, where we reduced hospitalizations by
Oh wow.
80% and the cost of care by 67%. That
Yeah.
is huge. That has potential impact to completely alter the trajectory of care, which is very exciting. In addition to that, we also have an opportunity to help some veterans out. So you've probably seen some of the stories on YouTube of us helping some vets. So we want to continue to go down that path. And if we can continue to help develop and impact lives with health plans and veterans, that is right in front of us for the next 9 to 12
Awesome.
months.
Well, I'm going to link some of those videos in the comment section below. So if you guys want to go check it out, or in the description below, so you guys want to go check it out, please do. Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to see what the work you guys do here. I think, just, the work you guys are doing and the groups you guys are addressing, it's truly something remarkable here. And obviously the early results are doing really well too. So, yeah, I'm excited to see where this goes. And thank you so much, Charles, for coming onto the podcast. It was truly a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it and look forward to the future.
A lot of people have been asking me what I use to do my podcast, and I'm happy to say that I use Zencastr. Zencastr is awesome because it's an all-in-one platform that allows you to have all the tools that you need from distribution to recording all in one platform. And so whether you want to record on the platform or you want to distribute to Apple Music and Spotify, you can do it all through Zencastr. It's also really easy to record a podcast with Zencastr because it's available on the browser. And the best thing about it is you actually get studio audio quality from those recordings, because Zencastr records the audio into the browser and then uploads it to the cloud. So you don't have to necessarily worry about your mic not being as good as you see in some video calls online. So if you want to get started with Zencastr today, feel free to go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my offer code DavidG for 30% off your first paid month. I'm really excited to see all the stories you guys share using Zencastr.